As I'm sure you're well aware at this point,
the huge game-changing twist of fate, wacky storytelling, crazy piece of lore is that Radagon is Marika.
Marika is Radagon.
The same god split in two.
And that's confirmed in-game directly several times, non-debatable.
I don't think Radagon is Marika. This goes against the main theory for Elden Ring, the idea that Radagon and Queen Marika are actually one person. To me, it doesn't feel finished and I'm just not a fan. It's hard to say why. Maybe the message Radagon is Marika is just jarring. Maybe it ruins the mystique and feels unrewarding. It just falls a bit flat. To any of the writers, I'm sorry if the Radika Theory is true, as this all sounds a bit rude, but it feels like a massive red herring and I can't shake that feeling. Now, I know many people do really like the Radika Theory, and it does fit the game's narrative, but it leaves unanswered questions. And using the Radika Theory can, in a way, halt any ideas that go against it. Ideas that could fill more of these plot gaps. So I'm arranging this different theory for interpreting the lore. Maybe it could open up some discussion before the Shadow of the Erdtree drops. Maybe not, but I love the lore of the FromSoft games, so I wanted to make this video to throw out some ideas. I cannot say enough how my knowledge of the lore is heavily influenced by many Elden Ring content creators. These YouTubers in particular do amazing deep dives into the lore, and in FromSoft games that's very tricky to do. Days of sifting through the games to produce insightful commentary, so a big thanks for their time and content. Quick disclaimer, I've never done this before. I've no doubt missed very relevant details, some of which might be really important. Sorry in advance. Please let me know if I've missed anything, as I genuinely need the help. I don't think Radagon is Marika, so please bear with me as I lay some groundwork. Real quick, if you know all the timelines for both Radagon and Marika, then please feel free to skip forward to the theory. But first things first, I want to try and explain the current theory before posing an alternative idea. Tons of detail and events will be skipped over to make these timelines more focused. If I've missed anything you think is important to their timeline, again please let me know. The Lands Between has history spanning thousands of years, with no dates and tons of mystery. Nothing is set in stone. This is just how a lot of people have set up the timeline for Elden Ring, including the Fextra Life wiki, so this is just a general timeline of those ideas. Starting with what we do know about Radagon of the Golden Order. Number 1, we know Radagon first appeared during the Liurnian Wars. Number 2, we know that here he battled Rennala of the Full Moon. Number 3, we know they get married and end the war, combining the Order of the Erdtree and the Fate of the Moon. Looking back further is tricky. It's speculated that before he appeared, Radagon split from Marika. Either Marika wanted a champion to fight for her, it was a result of taking Destined Death out of the Elden Ring, or maybe it was something Marika couldn't control. In any case, if Radagon split from Marika, it was around here. Mad Luigi has a great video on the timeline of Radagon, with the idea of Radagon instead being a descendant of the Fire Giants explored as a potential origin story. This is based on their shared red hair that Radagon despised having, his general stony complexion, and his son Radahn being a massive Chad. It is clear that FromSoft deliberately made Radagon's backstory ambiguous, so I'm not sure anyone can answer this one. For now, I'll start by calling this Mystery A. So, Radagon married Rennala, then number 4. We know they had 3 children together, Radahn, Rykard and Rani. Number 5, we know that Radagon left Rennala for Marika after she banished Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, from the Lands Between. Why exactly he left is still one of the big mysteries. The Radika Theory doesn't know for sure how or why he did this, but it is speculated it could all be due to them being the same person. Marika needs a consort, Radagon can clearly have kids, they don't mind a bit of self-cest, and maybe the only one right for Marika is Marika. It's still a mystery and it's a big one, but Radika Theory does kind of help explain it. Why did Radagon, a simple champion, get chosen by Marika? Because Radagon is Marika. Why did Radagon straight up leave his loving wife for Marika? Because Radagon is Marika. This is how I feel the Radika Theory explains things without explaining things. We rely on us being able to understand a god-queen split husband hybrid 2-person situation, and I don't think many of us have much personal experience with this kind of thing. So I'll circle back to this later and try and find a more explanatory explanation. And let's call this one Mystery B. Next, number 6, we know that Radagon gave Rennala a Great Rune before he leaves, the Great Rune of the Unborn, inside her big amber egg. It's a big mystery to me how Radagon got hold of a Great Rune to begin with. Maybe Radagon being Marika means he can create one? Maybe, maybe not. I'll leave this one as Mystery C for now. And lastly, number 7, Radagon goes to Leyndell and gets married to Marika. Now Radagon's timeline is joined up with Marika's, so going back, here's a brief timeline for Marika. Number 1, we know Marika is a Numen, a people from outside the Lands Between. Number 2, we know for sure that Godfrey fought for Marika against the Fire Giants. Number 3, we know at the birth of the Golden Order, Marika gave the Rune of Destined Death to her shadow-bound half-brother hound Malekith to seal it away. Number 4, we know after defeating the Fire Giants, she married Godfrey, her first husband and the first Elden Lord. Number 5, we know on they went to have 3 children together, Godwyn and the Omen twins Morgoth and Mohg. Number 6, it's generally accepted that around this time the First and Second Liurnian Wars happens, where we know Radagon first appears. And then number 7, we know Marika banished Godfrey away from the Lands Between as a tarnished. Godfrey's banishment is the accepted trigger for Radagon to leave Rennala and return to Leyndell.
When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Rennala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord.
So now we have Marika and Radagon together in one place. So for their joint timeline after marriage, number 1, we know that Radagon's children with Rennala were now classed as demigods. Number 2, we know for certain that Radagon and Marika had 2 children, Malenia and Mikola. Number 3, we know that after Ranni stole a fragment of the Rune of Death, the Black Knife assassins murdered Marika's son Godwyn. Why and how Godwyn's death went down is another big mystery. There's a lot of evidence and speculation that Marika was a part of setting up the Knight of Black Knives, potentially to unbind herself from the 2 fingers and the Greater Will. We don't really know yet. We know of Ranni's involvement from her questline, but we don't know about Marika's. Safe to say, I'll call this mystery D for now. Number 8, we know that Marika shattered the Elden Ring after the death of Godwyn drove her to the brink. Number 9, we know that Radagon tried to repair the Elden Ring. Number 10, we know that shards of the Elden Ring were inherited by Marika's children. And lastly, number 11, we know that Marika disappeared, secretly being locked away in the Erdtree as punishment for going against the Greater Will. That was all very quick, and again, this is just one version of the timeline. Everything here is still up for debate. As I said though, this is the generally accepted series of events. So far, I've listed these 4 mysteries. A. Where did Radagon come from before the Liurnian Wars? B. Why did Radagon leave Rennala after Marika banished Godfrey? C. How did Radagon have a Great Rune to give Rennala? And D. Who was involved in the Night of the Black Knives? We don't really know the answers to any of these yet. These are the big mysteries FromSoft has deliberately left ambiguous. The Radika Theory tries its best, but we just don't know. Alongside this timeline, I want to list the big pieces of evidence that point towards Radika and Marika being the same person. The biggest ones found in the game are: number 1, a skeleton in Radagon's closet being hidden by a sculptor within a big statue of him in Leyndell. This is the one that transforms and gives us the message Radagon is Marika. Number 2, Brother Corrin and Goldmask both talk about and acknowledge Radagon being Marika when you tell them the message of this statue. Number 3, Melina echoes Marika in the Queen's bedchamber, where Marika calls Radagon mine other self. Number 4, Malenia's remembrance says that her and Mikola were born from a single god, which is why they are Imperials. Number 5, the final boss fight begins with Marika morphing into Radagon. And number 6, there's a constant duality between Radagon and Marika in the Elden Ring trailers and in the opening cutscene. While I was thinking about this video, I almost gave up after finding each of these pieces of evidence. It felt like I was crazy to doubt that Radagon is Marika. Why bother trying to fight all this evidence? I actually did pack everything up a couple of times, but I couldn't stop thinking about some gnawing ideas. Each time I did think back, I found issues with even these pieces of evidence. Issues that I think can be resolved. A theory that might go further than Radika Theory. So, with all that groundwork out of the way, it's time to piece together this different theory. One that I've been thinking about since my first playthrough, a theory I can't shake and one I think fits better. I hope I can make this new theory clear, especially its response to each of these 6 pieces of evidence for Radagon being Marika. If anyone actually watches this video, and if anyone can point out anything I've missed, I beg you please let me know. By the end, I hope you'll see where I'm coming from. To be clear, I don't think Radagon and Marika are or ever were one person. The best place to start is with the message Radagon is Marika. Performing the law of regression in front of this statue makes it change from Radagon into Marika, along with the message Radagon is Marika. This statue was hinted at by the Turtle Pope Muriel earlier.
You know, it's said that Lord Radagon harboured a secret. A famed sculptor of the Erdtree capital was once summoned to render Lord Radagon's likeness in giant stature, when he glimpsed the skeleton in Radagon's closet. And as such, it's said the great statue harbours his secret too.
So this statue holds the secret is shown through it transforming, and we clearly get told Radagon is Marika. This is a big part of Goldmask's questline with Brother Corrin, where you can tell Goldmask about the message from the statue. The interesting thing here is how the questline progresses after you tell them this secret. Their interactions begin to change. Brother Corrin is a fundamentalist cleric and scribe for Goldmask, a great scholar of the Golden Order. All is going well, with Corrin somehow turning Goldmask's finger wagging into lessons on the Golden Order. When they get near the Erdtree, however, Goldmask gets stuck in his contemplation when Radagon's name comes into the picture.
Who exactly was Radagon? The Master is stumped. His finger has remained still ever since Radagon's name was discovered. But oh, how important could it really be?
After telling them the message of the statue, Goldmask begins his finger wagging again, which delights Corrin.
To think that Radagon was Marika herself. Or at least, such is all I can interpret from the rhythm and calculus of his finger. How would such a thing even have been possible, I wonder? Sadly, I cannot comprehend it myself. Do you have a fuller understanding of the matter? Well, either way, I can continue my documentation. In truth, it matters very little whether I understand the Master's thoughts or not. I am merely his scribe. It is my sole and unwavering purpose.
It's interesting that the message, Radagon is Marika, unstumps Goldmask. He was stuck on a problem, and this phrase was the key for him to continue his work. What's more interesting to me though is Corrin's acceptance of Radika. After you first tell them, he's not fazed at all by the idea. It doesn't make a lot of sense to him, but it doesn't challenge his fundamentalism.
In truth, it matters very little whether I understand the Master's thoughts or not.
Clearly, he doesn't mind Radagon and Marika being the same person. But when you next see them, Corrin is now spooked by Goldmask's thoughts. He's been freaked out by Goldmask, who's apparently challenging Golden Order principles.
I've been gripped by a terrifying thought. The rhythms and calculus of the Master's finger betray a suspicion of the holism of the Golden Order, a conceit, I am afraid, that cannot be overlooked. Oh, but how could this be? I dread to even entertain the possibility, but somehow I cannot cast aside my doubts about the Master. Tell me, have I simply lost my head? Only, if the Master were true to the Golden Order, why would he think to breach this forbidden mount of fire?
Goldmask's contemplations have progressed since Leyndell, and at some point, in some way, have begun to conflict with the fundamentals of the Golden Order.
The Golden Order is founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god.
This is stated by Corrin a bit earlier in their questline, so I think this is the principle that Goldmask is apparently questioning. Radika Theory would assume Marika being two people is the idea that's upsetting Corrin, but Radagon being Marika didn't conflict with Corrin to begin with, so why would it now? It must be Goldmask's contemplations on the key phrase, Radagon is Marika, that is causing Corrin's doubts. It's made Goldmask, great scholar of the Golden Order, think of ideas that are apparently blasphemous. So is the phrase, Radagon is Marika, a key to unravelling a secret layer of truth? One that would be blasphemous and incompatible to Golden Order fundamentalism? To be clear, I'm saying it's not Radagon being Marika that upsets Corrin. He was fine with accepting Radagon being Marika. After all, I guess if Radagon is Marika, then they're both still Marika, so she's still the one true god. It was later that Goldmask's new thoughts and theories upset him. What were these thoughts? Why was Corrin so shook up? We sadly don't get any more transcriptions out of Corrin. All we know is that Goldmask was triggered by the key phrase Radagon is Marika, to begin producing ideas that go against the Golden Order principles. As I've said, I think it's the one Corrin mentioned earlier, Marika is the one true god. And here, I think the phrase Radagon is Marika is indeed some sort of key, a key to a truth that unravels this principle. Radagon is Marika doesn't simply mean one person, two bodies. I think Radagon is Marika means something darker. So what else could this message mean? It's my theory that Radagon went to Leyndell to usurp Marika as god of the Golden Order. And, as this would go against Marika being the one true god, my theory is that he did this in secret. Radagon shackled Marika in the Erdtree, creating a facade of order, pretending that Marika was still in control.
Maybe something went tits with it. Maybe it's been broke for a good long time. The Erdtree, I'm saying.
Radagon ruled as Queen Marika, and crucially, I think this happened soon after he arrived in Leyndell. This would mean the Golden Order hasn't been ruled by Marika for a long, long time. This is something the sculptor figured out. A lot of what we thought to be Marika was actually Radagon. He's pulling off one massive masquerade.
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remains a god and the vision's vessel.
This would mean Radagon is Marika because he's pretending to be her, whilst desperately trying to mend the Elden Ring. And the more I've thought of Radagon secretly usurping Marika, the more I've seen it fitting in with more and more of the lore. For example, using the Usurping Theory changes how we can view the words of Marika spoken by Melina in the Queen's bedchamber.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. If Radagon was there to usurp Marika, then this choice of wording is interesting. It makes it appear that Marika knew Radagon's intentions. She knew he was sent by the Greater Will to take her place. You are here to become me, the god of the Golden Order. This is also the only direct conversation I can think of between Marika and Radagon. And if Marika was imprisoned in the Erdtree soon after his arrival in Leyndell, this might be the first and last conversation she has with Radagon. It might not be a coincidence that this conversation happens in the Queen's bedchamber, right next to the entrance to the Erdtree where she's imprisoned. We know from the trailer that shattering the Elden Ring took a physical toll on Marika's body, so if it did lead to Radagon heading for Leyndell, then maybe she wasn't strong enough to stop him. Maybe she did fight back. Maybe she's pretty much dead when Radagon shackles her in the Erdtree, keeping her as a vessel for the Elden Ring. Using this theory, her use of the phrase mine other self is interesting as well. It could hint at Marika knowing he would continue to use her image to maintain adherence to the Golden Order. If Radagon usurped Marika as soon as he got to Leyndell, and if he wanted to ensure continued worship of Marika, then this facade must have been going on for a long time, allowing him to focus on repairing the Elden Ring for the Greater Will. But how could he pull this deception off? Well, for some reason, the shape-shifting item is also known as Marika's Mischief. FromSoft deliberately decided to directly link this item to Marika herself. She was a Newman, like the Nox from the Eternal Cities, who are associated with mimicry, I guess. We know that Radagon studies Marika's incantations, and maybe this included some sort of disguising arts. This puts some form of disguising or mimicry on the table for how Radagon could pose as Marika for such a long time. As a whole, this idea desperately needs more investigation, which I don't think can be done if we just assume they're the same person. But the idea of Radagon using Mischief to pretend to be Marika works with another point. Marika's damaged body did turn into Radagon at the beginning of the final boss fight. I want to point out the flowing black goo stuff sticking out of the cracks in his body, as to me this seems to be the Elden Beast flowing inside him. When you defeat Radagon, the second phase begins and the Elden Beast emerges. It grasps Radagon's body, turning him into the Sacred Relic Sword, symbolising him as an instrument for the Golden Order and the Greater Will. We triumph though, and you find Marika's crumbling body remaining inside the Erdtree, her head lying on the floor next to her. But if Radagon became this sword for the Elden Beast, and if we've defeated the Elden Beast, then where does she come from? Could this be the real Marika? The first Marika that turns into Radagon could just be the disguise he's perfected. I know this might seem like I'm reaching for answers for this theory, but I think this has some room to grow. Let's explore this idea further and humour the idea that Radagon did chain up Marika soon after he arrives in Leyndell. Bear with me as this theory shakes up the timeline in an interesting way. First, all the actions we know Marika did herself would need to be moved before Radagon arrived in the capital. Most importantly, this moves the death of Godwyn and the shattering of the Elden Ring backwards, so they happen much earlier. And to my own surprise, this is supported by a piece of dialogue for Roger. I remembered one piece of his dialogue that referred to both these events, but I realised a problem that I'd missed before. Roger contradicts himself about Godwyn's death and Marika shattering the Elden Ring.
The misshapen corpse under Stormvale. That is a sacred relic of the Black Knives plot, as that famed night of assassination is known. It happened during the golden age of the Erdtree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade, and on a bitter night murdered Godwyn the Golden. That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon, the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering.
He says that Godwyn's death was long before the Elden Ring was shattered, and then says it was soon after his death. He does put the Night of the Black Knives during the Age of the Erdtree, where this theory needs it to be, but I wanted to check the Japanese version to see if it actually was soon followed by Marika smashing the Elden Ring. Luckily, I found a recent post where someone noticed the same contradiction. Discussing this issue regarding Roger's dialogue, user Lamy1 made this translation. In the prosperous era of the ancient Golden Tree, before the Elden Ring got shattered, someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith? From the Black Sword. In a cold night, Godwyn the Golden got murdered, becoming the first demigod to die in history. It is said that breaking the Elden Ring became the notch that would lead to the start of the Shattering War. As we know, translating is a tough business, and it wouldn't be wise to base everything on a translation, but it does agree with a few things. First, it agrees that the death of Godwyn was a catalyst for shattering the Elden Ring, but without suggesting a time frame. Second, it places the Knight of the Black Knives during the Age of Plenty, a time when Godfrey was known to still be around. Luckily for this theory, that means before Radagon went to Leyndell. Unfortunately for Godwyn, that means he died a lot sooner than first thought. And third, Ranni must have also stolen the Fragments of Death before Radagon had even left Rennala. In particular with Mystery D and the Knight of the Black Knives, as said, Ranni must have stolen the fragment during this Age of Plenty. As she confirms with us, her plan for the Black Knives assassination was to fight against her Empyrean status and the will of the Two Fingers. This means she would have been named as a potential replacement for Marika before she was promoted to demigod status. What makes someone an Empyrean is confusing enough, as is Marika's possible reaction to having her replacement already decided for her by the Two Fingers. I'm not really going to focus on Mystery D, Marika's involvement in Godwyn's death, as this video is getting way too long for me to handle already. But the Black Knife plot happening earlier does fit the timeline for the Radagon usurped Marika theory. One thing this does tell us is that the Two Fingers were already using their power and authority over other people besides Marika at this time. Within the community, there's also a fair bit of speculation on why Marika shattered the Elden Ring. To protect her children by weakening the Greater Will? To give them more power through Great Runes? We don't know for certain. We do know that Marika has doubts about the Golden Order.
I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past.
We do know that Marika told her children to choose their own destiny.
Hear me, demigods. My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, but should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
So I'm inclined to agree with Agent Jake's take from his video on Marika's great plan, and speculate that Marika herself gave the Great Runes to her children. She could have been forced to break up the Elden Ring because Ranni screwed up her big plan, using the plot to destroy her own body, freeing her soul from the grasp of the Two Fingers. It could be to protect her other children from dying like Godwyn. Either way, I speculate that the Great Runes were given by Marika and not found or won by the demigods during their wars. Godfrey might have still been around at this time, as Godwyn's death was during the Golden Age. I couldn't find anything mentioning Godwyn and Godfrey together, which is why I always assumed Godfrey was gone before his son's death. We know that Marika told him to
brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erd Tree.
So he must have had the Elden Ring himself, at least at some point. And Marika would need it back to shatter it. Maybe she needed Godfrey gone for this as well. I want to put the shattering of the Elden Ring very close to Godfrey leaving the Lands Between, and actually move his banishment to just before Marika shattered it. Having this moved before Radagon was in Leyndell also really helps address the duality between Radagon and Marika in both the trailers and opening cutscene. They are purposefully mirrored. One breaks the Elden Ring, the other repairs the Elden Ring, but I don't agree that this was showing them flickering between each other. If it was smashed soon after Godwyn's death, then Radagon was not at the capital, so he would be repairing the Elden Ring at a much later time than it was shattered. I don't know why seeing them both in the story trailer felt like the biggest hurdle for this theory. The matching cracks that appear across their shoulder was enough to make me doubt everything about the usurping idea. But now I feel confident this version of the timeline has enough to show it was just an artistic choice from FromSoft. Moving the events in this way will also affect part of Radagon's timeline. Specifically, Mystery B, why did he leave Rennala? Muriel is the one that suggests Godfrey's banishment was the trigger for Radagon to leave Rennala. But if this event is closely linked to Marika's shattering of the Elden Ring, what if breaking the Elden Ring itself was the real trigger for Radagon to go to Leyndell? And what if this was triggered by a direct instruction from the Greater Will?
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision, a god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree, a grim punishment for shattering the Order, despite her godhood.
We know that the strength of the Golden Order comes from the Elden Ring, and we know breaking the Elden Ring was a great sin, weakening the Golden Order. And we know
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence.
So, from the moment she shattered the Elden Ring, she was marked for punishment by the Fingers. And what's the one thing we know for certain about Radagon?
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order,
We are told repeatedly that Radagon is a fundamentalist, completely loyal, the Leyndell Hound of the Golden Order. As a fundamentalist, I don't think it's hard to believe he would be completely compelled to follow direct orders of the Two Fingers and the Greater Will, including leaving his family, and a heavy sentence must be enacted to punish Marika for shattering the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring being already broken also goes some way to explain Mystery C. How did Radagon have a Great Rune to give to Rennala? Okay, I don't really know how he got it, but let's talk about this Great Rune. We know Radagon gives this to Rennala just before he leaves. This rune has the power of allowing someone to be reborn. What's the significance of Radagon having this particular Great Rune just before he leaves Rennala? As I'm speculating, he was called by the Greater Will to punish Marika and rebuild the Elden Ring. Being commanded by the Greater Will as a firm, faithful follower to the Golden Order, this would surely be a task Radagon would feel obligated to carry out. But that would mean leaving his wife and kids behind. For me at least, that's a great personal sacrifice to carry out. Surely then, it makes sense that Radagon gave the Great Rune of the Unborn to Rennala to have her use its rebirth ability on himself, to have himself reborn as the perfect instrument for the Golden Order. This is an inherently tragic theory for the end of their marriage. Here's a man, called to a duty he cannot abandon, with a family he must leave, and a devoted wife who herself acts as the agent of his rebirth. She is creating a wholly new person, whose sole purpose was to leave her forever. For me, having a soft spot for all the Prepare to Cry stories, this had me interpreting Rennala in a much more sympathetic way than during my first playthrough. And I think anyone who has someone special can imagine the pain of having to willingly let them go, sacrificing the person you love, watching them disappear as a new person takes their place. Such is the calling of their duty. I don't think I'd want to leave my room either. So at this point, there's one more mention of Radagon being Marika for this theory to tackle. I've briefly gone through the statue message, Radagon is Marika, Goldmask and Corrin's questline, Marika's words in the Queen's bedchamber, Marika turning into Radagon in the final boss fight, and the duality and imagery between Radagon and Marika in the trailers and opening cutscene. The last piece of direct evidence is written in Melania's remembrance. It clearly says that she and Miquella were born from a single god. If Radagon shackled up Marika as soon as he arrived at the capital, how could they have had two children together? Well, for this theory to work, it would need to imply something dark. Marika would need to have already been locked in the Erdtree before the twins were born. And I personally think she would also essentially be dead at this point, just as a vessel for the Elden Ring. Either way, we know George R.R. Martin helped write Elden Ring, so the Game of Thrones-esque thing you have to imagine Radagon doing to Marika sounds to me like something he might write. It does fit for me at least. If this is the case, and the twins were born after Marika was already shackled, and potentially technically dead by then, this might be what the remembrance is referring to. They were born to a single god and a vessel. It might also explain why they were born suffering from curses. One with eternal youth, the other continually dying. One stagnant, the other decaying. Both like a pool of still water, like a stagnant vessel. There's definitely the most work needed for this bit, which is why I've left it last. That said, that's as much as I can think of on my own right now. I hope this has all remained coherent. I think I've tackled, or at least attempted to tackle, the way this theory works with the big 6 bits of evidence for Radika Theory. And I hope I've shown how the Usurping Theory actually does work with all of them. I hope this also goes some way to fill the 4 big mysteries. Well, except for Mystery A. Where did Radagon come from? I haven't said much on this. I'd like to think that he was just a small fire giant who loved the Golden Order. One thing I will say, we know this crisscross pattern on Radagon's statue and on Radagon's scar seal is the symbol used to represent him. And we know this pattern is in the main logo for the game. It underlines the entire Elden Ring. Maybe this is also one of the Great Runes in the Elden Ring, one that Marika needed to break through to remove the Rune of Destined Death. And I don't know, maybe breaking through this pattern in the Elden Ring made Radagon pop out of it? I don't know, you can speculate on any theory really. And to be real, my speculations might be wrong for everything in this video. Even so, playing through the game whilst looking at everything through the Usurping Theory was a lot of fun. And that's what makes this game so good to begin with. If you still think Radika Theory wins, and that the Radagon usurped Marika theory is all wrong, I'd greatly appreciate any discussions. I'm happy to be proven wrong. This is just a theory after all, it's not a manifesto. That said, if you did like this take on the lore, if you agree with some of it or disagree with most of it, or if it at least got you thinking about the lore in a different way, please also let me know. I didn't realise this video would be so long. As I've said, I've never done this before, so thank you for bearing with me as well. God damn, this is harder than you'd think.